There comes a point in life when the silence around you becomes louder than the noise of the world. And in that silence, you hear the truth raw, unfiltered, and sometimes very uncomfortable. That truth is, no one is coming to save you. For the longest time I waited. I waited for someone to tell me that everything would be okay. I waited for someone to fix what was broken, to stitch the pieces of my heart back together, to wipe the tears I cried in silence. I waited like so many of us do because I believed that healing comes from someone else, that strength can be borrowed, that joy can be gifted, that love, validation, acceptance, all of it was supposed to come from others. But the longer I waited, the more I realized I was handing over my power every single time I depended on someone to make me feel whole. You see, we grow up with stories that make us believe that we are incomplete until someone else completes us. Stories that convince us that our happiness lies in someone else's hands. We are taught to be soft, taught to be patient, taught to sacrifice, and none of these are wrong, but we are not taught how to stand tall when no one claps for us. We are not taught how to embrace our failures when there is no one left to encourage us. We are not taught how to walk alone. Let me tell you something. The most powerful version of you is not the one surrounded by applause. It is not the one whose phone keeps ringing. It is not the one always being helped, guided, saved. No, the most powerful version of you is the one that has cried on the bathroom floor, wiped your own tears, stood up, and said, "This is not how my story ends." That is power. Depending on others doesn't make you weak, but making it a habit will break you. Because when you rely on someone else to constantly validate your worth, you give them the permission to take it away too. When you make someone else the reason you feel happy, you hand them the strings to your peace, and the day they walk away, they take that peace with them. Then what are you left with? You must become your own anchor, your own cheerleader, your own healer. You must be so rooted in who you are that even when the world tells you you're not enough, you don't believe it. You don't need to wait for someone to hold your hand through the fire. Sometimes your hand is enough. Sometimes your courage is louder than the silence. Sometimes walking alone becomes the most sacred journey of your life, not because no one wanted to walk with you, but because that path was meant for you alone. And yes, people will leave, support will disappear. The ones who promised forever might only be temporary lessons. But that doesn't mean you stop walking. That doesn't mean you stop dreaming. That doesn't mean you start shrinking yourself just to fit into someone's version of what your life should be. You were not born to be carried through life. You were born to rise. You were born to roar. You were born to fall, yes, but also to rise higher every single time. And you do not need an audience for that. You just need you. So stop depending on others to lift you up when you have wings of your own. Stop depending on people to love you when your heart is already full of the kind of love that transforms pain into power. Stop waiting. Start becoming. Because the day you decide to stop depending on others is the day you truly begin to live. Self-reliance is not just about being alone or doing everything on your own. It's about trusting your own voice in a world that is constantly trying to tell you who to be. We live in a time where it's so easy to become dependent on technology, on praise, on people, on outcomes, and we confuse dependence with connection. We start to believe that unless someone agrees with us, validates us, appreciates us, we are not worthy. But there comes a day when life strips you of the safety nets you always leaned on. That's the day when self-reliance stops being a choice and starts becoming your only path to survival. And in that very moment, you discover something extraordinary, the kind of power you never knew you had. The kind of strength that was buried under layers of approval, seeking and people, pleasing. When you start to rely on yourself truly and completely, you stop shrinking yourself to fit into places you've outgrown. You stop waiting for someone to understand you before you allow yourself to express. You stop apologizing for your own light. You realize that the world does not owe you comfort. People do not owe you kindness. Situations do not owe you convenience. But you owe yourself resilience. You owe yourself that promise that no matter who stays, no matter who walks away, you will not break. That no matter how heavy the world becomes, you will not give up on yourself. That is the essence of self-reliance. It is not arrogance. It is not stubbornness. It is self-respect. It is telling yourself that you matter, even when no one says it out loud. It is holding your own hand through the storm and whispering, "We'll make it through," even when your voice trembles. We often wait for someone to believe in us before we dare to try. We wait for someone to see our potential before we begin to chase our dreams. But what if that someone never comes? What if you're the one you've been waiting for all along? What if your belief in yourself is the only permission you ever needed? The truth is, we spend years molding ourselves to fit into the expectations of others. We try to be enough for people who are not even enough for themselves. We wait for validation that never comes, and in that wait, we forget the sound of our own intuition. We forget the rhythm of our own heartbeat. But the day you choose self-reliance, everything changes. You begin to remember. You begin to rebuild. You begin to rewrite the script that told you you're not enough without someone else's stamp of approval. There is unmatched power in standing alone, not because you have no choice, but because you have finally realized that your worth was never meant to be measured by someone else's opinion. Self-reliance teaches you to listen to the silence between the chaos. It teaches you to find clarity not in the noise of the crowd, but in the quietness of your own soul. It teaches you that your dreams do not need consensus, that your growth does not need to be understood by others, that your path does not have to make sense to anyone but you. And once you step into that truth, the fear of being alone fades. The fear of not being enough disappears. Because you begin to really see yourself for the first time, without filters, without comparisons, without neediness. And what you see is someone who is worthy, capable, whole. You stop depending on people who show up only when it's easy. You stop relying on situations that are unpredictable. You stop looking outward for what only the inner world can provide. And that is when the shift happens. You go from surviving to creating. You go from doubting to deciding. You go from waiting to becoming, and it's not about being perfect or always knowing what to do. It's about being willing to trust yourself even when you're scared, being willing to try even when you don't have a guarantee, being willing to start over even when everything has fallen apart. That is real power. That is real confidence. That is real self-reliance. People may tell you that being independent makes you hard, that relying only on yourself will make you distant or detached. But they don't understand that it's not about closing yourself off. It's about building a home within yourself that no one else can burn down. It's about having roots so deep that the wind cannot shake you. It's about loving yourself enough to say, even if no one walks with me, I will still walk. Because when you rely on yourself, you stop settling for less. You stop begging for scraps of love and attention. You stop entertaining people who drain you, and instead you start rising, you start shining, you start protecting your peace like it's sacred because it is. You start choosing yourself not because you're selfish, but because you finally realize you've spent enough time abandoning your own needs to meet the expectations of others. You stop waiting for permission to be great. You stop asking for directions to places you were born to create. You stop giving people the pen to write your story. You take it back, even if your hands are shaking. You take it back because no one else knows your dreams the way you do. No one else feels your fire the way you do. No one else can live your life for you, and no one else should. So you rise, not because someone told you to, but because you told yourself that staying down was no longer an option. You begin to build, not because someone offered you help, but because your soul refused to stay empty. You begin to speak, not because someone finally gave you the stage, but because your truth deserved to be heard even if it was only by you. Emotional independence is the quiet, unseen strength that carries you when no one else understands what you're going through. It is not the absence of love or relationships. It is the presence of a deep, unwavering connection with yourself. It means not needing someone else's approval to feel worthy, not waiting for someone else's affection to feel loved, and not depending on someone else's support to feel strong. Emotional independence doesn't mean you don't value others. It means you don't lose yourself in them. It is knowing who you are even when the world forgets. It is standing tall in your truth even when others try to shake it. It is the realization that your peace, your joy, your worth, none of it is up for negotiation or transfer. Too often, we hand over our emotional stability to people who don't know how to handle it. We place our happiness in someone's hands and call it love. We wait for kind words to feel seen, and we wait for applause to feel successful. But what happens when those words never come? What happens when the applause fades, the texts stop, the people walk away? Do you collapse, or do you finally meet yourself? Emotional independence means you stop tying your self-worth to someone else's behavior. It means your mood is no longer dictated by how someone else treats you. It means that when someone disappoints you, you don't break, you adjust, you reflect, you grow, but you don't fall apart because your foundation was never built on someone else's presence to begin with. You begin to understand that people will love you in the way they know how, and sometimes that love will not be enough for you, and that's okay. Emotional independence teaches you to receive love without clinging to it, and to lose love without losing yourself. It teaches you to show up fully in relationships without losing the ability to walk away when respect is no longer served. It reminds you that you can feel everything, the joy, the pain, the excitement, the grief, and still be whole. Still be grounded, still be you, because you are not your feelings. You are the one who experiences them. You are not what happened to you. You are the one who survived it. Many of us are taught to seek comfort outside ourselves. We are taught to believe that healing comes when someone says, "I'm sorry," or "I love you," or "I'll never leave." And while those words can be beautiful, they are not your medicine. Your healing does not reside in someone else's voice. It lives inside you in the way you speak to yourself, in the way you hold space for your pain, in the way you remind yourself that you are not too much or not enough, you are exactly who you need to be. Emotional independence teaches you to give yourself the closure you never got, the kindness you never received, the love you kept giving away while silently starving for it. It does not mean you isolate yourself. It does not mean you close off your heart or push people away. It means you no longer place your emotional survival in someone else's hands. It means you understand that your feelings are yours to manage, your responsibility to navigate, your journey to walk. It means that when the storm comes, you don't wait for someone to rescue you, you learn how to dance in the rain, how to build shelter within your soul, how to dry your own tears and keep moving forward even when the path is unclear. You stop waiting for a savior and start becoming your own sanctuary. There is something incredibly powerful about knowing that you can sit with your sadness and not let it consume you, that you can face rejection and still love yourself, that you can feel abandoned and still choose to stay with yourself. Emotional independence is not about never getting hurt, it's about not letting the hurt define you. It's about choosing to respond instead of react, to forgive instead of resent, to release instead of cling. It's about having compassion for yourself in moments of weakness and celebrating yourself in moments of strength. It's about knowing that no matter how messy life becomes, you are capable of holding space for your own healing. The world often teaches us to attach our identity to our roles, the daughter, the friend, the partner, the achiever. But what happens when those roles shift, when the relationship ends, when the job changes, when the applause quiets? Who are you then? Emotional independence invites you to find your identity beyond the roles you play, to know who you are without the title, without the status, without the attachment, to love who you are when no one's watching, to be proud of yourself when no one else says it, to honor your feelings not as weaknesses to hide, but as truths to be held. You stop depending on someone else to calm your anxiety, to validate your choices, to fill the empty spaces inside you. You begin to understand that the emptiness you feel is not because something is missing, it's because you've been disconnected from yourself for too long. You begin to rebuild that connection, brick by brick, with patience, with gentleness, with honesty. You begin to ask yourself what you need instead of what others think you should be. You begin to set boundaries not out of anger, but out of self-respect. You begin to say no, not because you're unkind, but because you're finally prioritizing your peace. Emotional independence allows you to walk into a room and not worry whether you're liked. It allows you to end a relationship and not crumble. It allows you to face criticism without abandoning your truth. It gives you freedom not from others, but from your own expectations of what others should be for you. You stop waiting for the world to give you permission to feel good. You stop seeking rescue in every relationship. You stop placing the burden of your healing on someone else's shoulders, and you start showing up for yourself in ways no one else ever could. You start becoming the person you always needed. You start loving yourself not because someone else finally did, but because you chose to. Because you realize that emotional independence isn't about being cold, it's about being whole. Loneliness has always been painted as something to fear, something to avoid, something to escape. We are taught that being alone means something is missing. That if we're not surrounded by people, then there must be something wrong with us. That if we're not constantly connected, we're somehow failing at life. But what if loneliness is not a punishment? What if it's a space, a sacred space, where we finally hear our own voice without the noise of the world? What if it's not emptiness, but openness, a door waiting to be walked through, not run from? There's a kind of beauty in solitude that only reveals itself when everything else is stripped away. When the distractions fall silent, when the conversations pause, when the rooms grow quiet, you are left with the one person you often avoid the most, yourself. In loneliness, we come face to face with the truth of who we are. Not the version we post online, not the version we pretend to be around others, but the real, raw, unfiltered self. And that encounter can be terrifying, because it requires us to confront parts of ourselves we've buried under years of avoidance, noise, and external validation. Yet that confrontation is not our enemy, it is our awakening. It is where healing begins. It is where we learn that our worth was never tied to who stayed or who left. It is where we begin to see ourselves as more than a role we played in someone else's life. It is where we start to unlearn the lie that we must be surrounded to be whole. We often confuse loneliness with being unloved, but the two are not the same. Being alone is a physical state. Feeling lonely is an emotional one. And even in the most crowded rooms, you can feel completely unseen. That's why the answer is not always in finding more people, it's in finding more of yourself. The self that feels neglected, the self that's been silenced, the self that's been put on hold while you ran around trying to be enough for everyone else. Loneliness is a mirror. It reflects not just the absence of others, but the absence of self. It shows you where you've abandoned your own heart in pursuit of someone else's attention. It reveals the places you've dimmed your light to make others comfortable, and it gently invites you back to you in this quiet space. You begin to ask yourself questions you've never had time to consider. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I love when no one is influencing me? What kind of life do I want to build if I'm not living to impress anyone else? These questions may not have immediate answers, but asking them is the beginning of a transformation. You begin to realize that maybe the loneliness you feared is actually a doorway to freedom, freedom from people pleasing, from needing validation, from chasing after temporary connections that never nourished you anyway. You begin to see that solitude is not a lack of love, but a space where self-love can grow without interruption. So many of us jump from distraction to distraction, relationship to relationship, because we don't know how to sit with ourselves. We are uncomfortable in our own presence, so we seek the presence of others to avoid the discomfort. But what if sitting with yourself is exactly what you need? What if the silence isn't empty, but full of the answers you've been seeking? What if your greatest breakthrough is waiting on the other side of the loneliness you've been so afraid of? When you stop running, when you finally sit still, you begin to hear the whispers of your soul. You begin to notice the small things, the way your heart softens when you speak kindly to yourself, the way your body feels when you're not rushing to meet someone else's expectations, the way your spirit lifts when you allow yourself to just be. Loneliness becomes a gift when you use it as a time to reconnect with yourself, to nourish your spirit, to rebuild your foundation. It becomes a space for reflection, for creating, for discovering who you are outside the noise. In that space, you learn to comfort yourself without depending on someone else's presence. You learn to cheer yourself on without needing a crowd. You learn to be your own best friend, your own source of calm, your own sanctuary. And slowly, what once felt like isolation begins to feel like empowerment. What once felt like emptiness begins to feel like clarity, because you are not broken, you are not lacking, you are simply growing, and growth often requires solitude. The world moves fast, and in that rush we forget how to be with ourselves. We forget that solitude is where wisdom grows, where strength is forged, where creativity is born. Some of the most powerful, soulful, life-changing moments happen not when you are surrounded by others, but when you are alone with your thoughts, your pain, your dreams. Loneliness teaches you resilience. It teaches you how to rely on your inner resources. It teaches you that you don't have to fill every silence with noise, every pause with a person, every void with distraction. It teaches you how to be enough for yourself. We spend so much time searching for someone who will understand us, who will see us, who will love us as we are. But what if the first person who needs to do that is you? What if the relationship you have with yourself sets the tone for every other relationship in your life? What if the love you're searching for outside is already waiting within you, just beneath the surface, ready to rise if only you'd give it the space to bloom? Loneliness becomes a teacher then, not a punishment, not a curse, but a gentle guide leading you back to the parts of you that were forgotten, neglected, dismissed. When you stop fearing loneliness, you begin to find peace in your own presence. You start to appreciate your own thoughts, your own energy, your own voice. You stop needing constant validation because you've learned how to validate yourself. You stop settling for half-hearted connections because you've tasted the fullness of your own companionship. And you begin to understand that being alone doesn't mean you are not loved. It means you are finally learning how to love yourself in the deepest, truest way possible. The time you spend alone is never wasted if you use it to build yourself. If you use it to tend to your inner wounds, if you use it to listen, to feel, to grow, because one day, when the noise returns, when the world gets loud again, when people come and go as they always do, you will remain grounded, steady, whole. Not because someone else held you together, but because you learned how to hold yourself through it all. That is the power hidden in loneliness. That is the strength it offers when you stop running from it and start leaning in.